My daughter's imaginary friend said she was the original owner of our house and just wanted someone to play with her child. I've spent 15 years trying to forget what happened during those terrible months after my wife's death. I've moved across the country, changed jobs, even gone through intensive therapy, anything to convince myself that what my daughter and I experienced was just grief playing tricks on our minds. But last week, Emma turned 18, and over what should have been a celebratory coffee, she showed me something that's forced me to confront the truth. The thing that lived in our old house wasn't grief. It wasn't imagination. And it's still looking for someone to play with. I should start at the beginning. My wife Sarah's death wasn't just unexpected, it was the kind of sudden that splits your life into distinct before and after segments. We'd been together since college, married for 5 years, and had just started hitting our stride as parents to our 3-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah was the organized one, the planner, the one who somehow managed to juggle a full-time job as an elementary school teacher with maintaining our household and being an amazing mother. I was the more laid-back parent, content to follow her lead and marvel at how she made it all look so easy. That Tuesday morning in April 2009 was drizzly but otherwise unremarkable. Sarah was running late for work because Emma had thrown a tantrum about wearing her rain boots. I remember Sarah was frazzled, her dark hair escaping from its usual neat bun as she gathered her things. The last words she said to me were, "Don't forget Emma has dance class at 4. Then she was out the door, keys jingling, travel mug of coffee in hand. The police said the other driver had been texting. He ran a red light doing 50 in a 35 zone. Sarah's little Honda Civic didn't stand a chance against his SUV. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone. Internal bleeding, they said. Words like massive trauma and nothing we could do floated around me in that sterile hospital corridor, but none of them seemed real. The next few weeks passed in a blur. My mother came to stay with us, handling the funeral arrangements and fielding the endless parade of well-meaning neighbors with their casseroles and awkward condolences. I took leave from my job at the architectural firm, unable to focus on building designs when my entire world had collapsed. Emma, too young to fully understand what had happened, kept asking when mommy was coming home. Each time she asked, it felt like the accident was happening all over again. Looking back, I think the strange event started small, so small that in our grief-stricken state, we didn't notice at first. Emma's toys would be in different places than where she'd left them. The temperature in certain rooms would drop inexplicably, even during the warm spring days. The old grandfather clock in our living room, a wedding gift from Sarah's parents, started chiming at odd hours, despite keeping perfect time. But the swing set is where it all really began. Sarah had insisted on getting the swing set when Emma turned 2, even though our backyard was barely big enough for it. It was a simple wooden structure with 2 regular swings and a little covered platform that was supposed to be a fort. Emma had never shown much interest in it before, she was more of an indoor kid, content with her dolls and coloring books. But about 6 weeks after the funeral, right around the time my mother had to return home, Emma suddenly became obsessed with swinging. At first, I was relieved. After weeks of subdued behavior and crying jags, seeing her laugh and play felt like a miracle. I set up my laptop on the back porch, working from home while keeping an eye on her. She would spend hours out there, pumping her little legs and giggling at the sky. That's when I first noticed she was talking to someone. It started with snippets of conversation that I could hear through my home office window. Normal kid stuff, I thought. Lots of children have imaginary friends. But there was something about the cadence of these conversations that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Emma would stop swinging abruptly, cock her head as if listening to someone, then respond to questions I couldn't hear. Sometimes she would climb down and stand very still beside the empty swing next to hers, reaching up as if holding someone's hand. The first time I asked her about it, she was coloring in the kitchen, her tongue stuck out in concentration as she carefully stayed inside the lines, something Sarah had been teaching her before the accident. "Who were you talking to out there today, sweetie?" "Miss Sarah," she said without looking up, switching from a blue crayon to a purple one. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. What did you say?" "Miss Sarah," Emma repeated patiently, the way children do when they think adults are being particularly slow. "She likes to swing with me. But she says she's not my mommy Sarah," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "She's different. She had a little girl too, a long time ago. Before our house was here." I told myself it was just a coincidence. Emma was processing her grief by creating a friend who shared her mother's name. It was fine. Normal, even. Dr. Chen, her pediatrician, had warned me that children often cope with loss in unexpected ways. But then things started happening that couldn't be explained away so easily. It began with Emma's toys. I'd go to bed with her dolls and stuffed animals scattered around the living room, too exhausted to enforce cleanup time, only to come down in the morning to find everything arranged in perfect circles on the floor. Not just roughly circular, these were geometrically precise arrangements that a 3-year-old couldn't have managed. Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, a well-worn pink thing she'd had since infancy, started appearing in bizarre places, balanced on top of the bookshelf, sitting in the kitchen sink, once even perched on the roof of her dollhouse with its head rotated completely backward. The swing became another source of unease. I'd look out the window to check on Emma only to see both swings moving in perfect synchronization, even though she was only using one. There was never any wind. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear the distinctive creak of the swing's chains through my bedroom window, a slow back and forth that would continue until I got up the courage to look outside. The swing would always be empty, but still moving, as if someone had just jumped off. Then the photographs started changing. We had photos everywhere, I couldn't bear to take them down after Sarah died. Emma needed those reminders of her mother, and honestly, so did I. The gallery wall in our hallway was especially important to us, filled with family milestones, our wedding, Emma's birth, first steps, birthday parties. I knew every single one of those photos by heart, which is why the changes were so jarring. It started with Emma's second birthday party photo. I was walking past it one morning, coffee in hand, when something made me stop and look closer. There was a woman standing in the background, partially obscured by the kitchen door. She wore what looked like a Victorian-era dress, high-necked and somber, her face turned away from the camera. My hand shook so badly I sloshed coffee on the floor. I knew that doorway had been empty in the original photo. I had taken it myself. Over the next few days, more photos changed. The woman appeared in the background of our Christmas morning pictures, standing near the tree. She showed up in Emma's first day of preschool photo, watching from behind a tree in our front yard. Always in that same dark dress, always with her face turned away. "That's Miss Sarah," Emma said matter-of-factly when she caught me staring at one of the altered photos. She says she's been here a long time, longer than our house. She says this used to be her land. That night, after Emma was asleep, I started researching our property's history. Our house had been built in 1978, but before that, the land had been part of the Whitaker family farm, which dated back to the 1800s. The farm had operated continuously until the 1970s, when the last Whitaker sold it to developers. But as I dug deeper into newspaper archives, I found something that made my blood run cold. In 1892, tragedy struck the Whitaker family. Sarah Whitaker and her 4-year-old daughter Grace both contracted diphtheria. They died within days of each other, leaving behind Thomas Whitaker, who never remarried. The article included a photo of Sarah Whitaker standing in front of their farmhouse. She wore a high-necked dark dress, her hair pulled back severely from her face. She wasn't looking at the camera. I should have been terrified by this discovery, but instead, I felt an odd sense of relief. If this spirit, this other Sarah, had been here so long, surely she meant no harm. She seemed to be looking after Emma, in her way. Maybe she was just lonely, missing her own little girl. I even started to feel grateful for her presence, especially after I noticed Emma's nightmares about losing her mother had stopped. That comfort lasted exactly 3 days. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to Emma screaming. Not the normal nightmare scream I'd gotten used to in the months since her mother died, but something primal and terrified that made my paternal instincts go haywire. I ran to her room and found her standing on her bed, pressed against the wall, pointing at her closet with a shaking finger. "She wants me to go with her." Emma was hysterical, tears streaming down her face. "Miss Sarah says her Grace is so lonely, and I could play with her forever." "But Daddy," her voice dropped to a horrified whisper, "her Grace doesn't look right anymore." I scooped Emma up and ran from the room, but not before I caught a glimpse of what had terrified her so badly. The closet door was open just a crack, and in that sliver of darkness, I saw something move. Something that looked like a woman in an old-fashioned dress, cradling what might have been a child, if children were made of shadow and had too many joints, too many angles, limbs that bent in impossible ways. We slept in the living room that night, Emma curled against my chest like she hadn't done since she was a baby. The next morning, I started making calls. The local Catholic church sent Father Martinez, who blessed the house and advised me to remove anything that might have spiritual significance. The swing set came down that afternoon. I reached out to Robert Blackfeather, a Native American elder I knew through work, and he performed a cleansing ceremony that filled the house with sage smoke and solemn prayers. I even contacted a paranormal research team, though they found nothing concrete except some unexplained cold spots and EMF readings near where the swing set had been. But their equipment kept malfunctioning in Emma's room, especially near the closet. Batteries would drain instantly, cameras would shut off, and one investigator's brand new thermal imaging device simply stopped working and never turned on again. Whether it was the prayers, the cleansing, or just time, things gradually returned to normal. Emma stopped talking about Miss Sarah, and eventually claimed not to remember any of it. We moved across the country when she was 10, and I thought that was the end of it. Until last week. Emma was home from her first semester at UCLA, and we were having coffee at our favorite spot in Seattle, catching up on her college experiences. She was in the middle of telling me about her art history class when she suddenly went very quiet, staring at her phone with a look I hadn't seen in 15 years. "Dad," she said slowly, "do you remember Miss Sarah?" My coffee turned to ice in my stomach. "I thought you didn't remember any of that." "I didn't. Or I convinced myself I didn't. But I've been having these dreams lately." She trailed off, then turned her phone toward me. "There's something you need to see." She showed me a post from an Instagram account called historic_Millbrook_archives. I'm changing the town name for privacy reasons. It was a black and white photograph from the late 1800s, showing a woman in a high-necked dress standing next to a simple wooden swing. The caption read, "Sarah Whitaker and her daughter Grace in front of their home, circa 1891. Both would tragically pass away the following year." The woman was looking directly at the camera, and I recognized her immediately. She had the same face as the figure that had appeared in our family photos all those years ago. But what made my hands start shaking was what Emma said next. "That's not what scared me, Dad. Look at the next picture in the set." She swiped to the next image, another photo from the same day, apparently taken moments later. The woman was turned away from the camera now, looking down at something. The caption noted that this photo was slightly damaged, but as I looked closer, I realized what I was seeing wasn't damage at all. The little girl in the photo wasn't human anymore. The figure beside Sarah Whitaker was a twisted, elongated thing, with too many angles and limbs that bent the wrong way. It was reaching up toward her mother with hands that looked more like branches than fingers, its face a dark smear that seemed to be grinning too widely. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "That's what I saw in my closet that night. That's what she wanted me to play with." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, though I was afraid I knew the answer. "Because I got a friend request on Facebook yesterday," she said, pulling up the app with trembling fingers. The profile picture was just a swing set, our old swing set. And there was one post on the timeline, from 3 hours ago. She turned the phone so I could see. The status update was simple: my Grace is still so lonely. Don't you think your little girl would like a friend? She's all grown up now, but she could still come play. Grace remembers how to make her small again. The profile has been deleted now. Emma has blocked every account that tries to contact her from our old hometown. We've agreed to never visit the old house, though it's been sold 3 times since we left. I've started researching what happened to other families who live there, and I'm finding disturbing patterns. Children who had imaginary friends, families who moved away suddenly, one child who disappeared in 1997 after telling her parents she was going to play with Grace. But sometimes, late at night, I look at that historical society photo and wonder, was Miss Sarah really trying to find a friend for her daughter? Or was she trying to warn us about what Grace had become? Had she been protecting Emma all along, appearing in our photos and watching over her to keep something worse at bay? Either way, I've started having dreams about swing sets. They're always empty, moving slightly in a wind that isn't there. And sometimes, just before I wake up, I hear children laughing, and underneath that laughter, something else. Something that sounds like cracking bones and stretching skin. Emma called me this morning. She said she woke up to find her old stuffed rabbit sitting on her dorm room desk, its head turned completely backward. She's coming home for a while. I think we need to move again. Update: a friend who still lives in our old town just sent me a link to a real estate listing. Our old house is for sale again. In one of the backyard photos, you can see a vintage wooden swing set that the realtor swears wasn't there during the photo shoot.